Welcome to the city of Belobog, the city of preservation, the sentient citadel, the last bastion of humanity against the eternal freeze. These grand titles are not without reason here, because the only place where people can survive is behind these walls. Today we will take a walk through the most interesting places in the city and its background. Our first stop is Klippa Fort, the heart of Belobog and the main headquarters of the architects. Here you can see the supreme garden of the city, Lady Brona, as today happens to be her reception day. But let's not distract her from the important reflections and just take a look around here. It looks magnificent, doesn't it? By the way, I'll tell you a secret. This room is all a stage for the tourists. Even the books on the table are actually empty. The true office of the garden is located elsewhere where, of course, we won't be allowed. As for now, let's continue our tour. Let's take a look at the main attraction of the city, the Monument of Eternal Winter. It is built in memory of the mighty architects who are followers of the Ion of Klippa. It was they who raised the walls around the city and founded Belobog. As you can see, the monument consists of two parts: gears symbolizing knowledge and industrial power, and huge ice crystals symbolizing the eternal freeze. These two symbols are intertwined. Gears constraining the ice. Progress against destruction. It's highly symbolic, isn't it? Across the square, you can see a fountain. The city's residents believe that if you throw a coin to it and make a wish, it will definitely come true. That's why if you look closely, you can see a lot of coins at the bottom. Now we will head to the Western District, which is famous for its artistic atmosphere. It's best to go there by tram, but we will take a walk along Ellis Avenue beside the tracks, as it's not far from here. We'll talk about Alice herself a little later, as her name is closely tied to the city's history. But for now, our first stop is the Golden Theatre, which features works such as the oratorio Supreme Guardian or the musical Under the White Clock, which was created 30 years ago. As you can guess, the fight against the eternal freeze is so deeply embedded in the city's cultural code, so it finds reflection even in the theatrical performances. Behind the theatre, you can see a small passage called the Alley, where the poor people live. Sometimes you can catch a glimpse of them near the fence, but the guards don't let them go any further. Interesting fact: there are as many heaters on the streets as there are in the houses. You can see them everywhere. Thanks to the work of the architects, it's always warm in Belobog, but in rare cases there are floods of icy rain into the city. The consequences of such phenomena can be seen as ice on the buildings of Belobog, as well as long icicles on structures and trees. Currently they are not visible because the weather during this time of the year is favorable. However, abnormally low temperatures often occur here before and after the Sun Festival, which lasts for a week. It's a grand celebration during which sun pancakes are baked. Be sure to come and see it. You definitely won't regret it. Meanwhile, we arrived at the History and Cultural Museum. Usually you would need to buy a ticket to enter, but thanks to my connections, we'll be able to enter for free. I need to warn you, we won't be staying here for too long. I have another detailed tour for that. Right now, we'll just look at the most interesting things. So, the History and Cultural Museum was built over 600 years ago. The museum has just reopened after reconstruction, which usually takes place once every 10 years and lasted for 100 days this time. And now you have a unique opportunity to see its updated appearance. The first thing we see is the main hall of the museum. Here you can see quite an extensive and diverse collection of items related to the everyday life of the city. Let's take a look at the city landscapes painted by the famous local artist Vander Ribini. A downbeam showing Belobog in the rays of the morning sun. The Golden Theatre, which we recently saw in person. Views of the underworld, which we will also visit. The lobby of the Goethe Grand Hotel, where we will definitely stop here for a snack. An abandoned mine in town. The flower shop, you can saw it on the way to the museum. The ruins of ancient architect structures. In the center of the hall, there are items related to daily life. A model of a tram beloved by the locals. A bit of Guermero, which we'll discuss in more detail in the mines. And even a cannon of a Silvermane Gardens. I've always been curious if it still works, but there's nothing to charge it anyway. So, Perhaps the most interesting thing you can see in this hall is right here. It's a meteorite fragment from a meteor shower that hit the planet 700 years ago during the Antimatter Legion attack. It can look like an ordinary stone, but it's a stone closely tied to the history of this place. So, while you don't get bored, let's move on to the next hall, the Hall of Industry. And the first thing we see, yes, another sculpture with gears that the locals love so much. By the way, it's called Gears and Wisdom, whatever that means. While realizing the symbolism of this monument, let's look at something more interesting: robots. Automatons more precisely. They were specially created for various mining works, and when we go down there, we might come across one of these handsome guys from left to right. The Spider Automaton, which was created specifically for remote explosive works. The Beetle Automaton, but everyone calls it a traffic light. The lanterns are used for traffic regulation and construction. And the Hound Automaton, created in the likeness of a puppy, a favorite of the people and just a good boy. On the left, you can see a collection of local automobiles. The Lantern model car, which is used for paid passenger transport. However, it's almost impossible to see them on the city streets. The locals prefer to travel on the much cheaper tram. The limited edition Lighthouse model and the Bronze Wall model, which we have already seen by the fountain or on the way to the theater if you weren't attentive enough. However, you can see them all over the city. It's a very popular model. And the last but not least, the Hall of History and Culture. The first thing we encounter here is the portraits of the Supreme Guardians of the city, starting from the first Supreme Guardian, Alice Rand, to the latest Supreme Guardian, Kakola, with her daughter, Lady Bronya, who we saw at the beginning of our tour. Look, she hasn't changed much, even the hairstyle is the same. This one is quite an interesting exhibit. Alice Rand's spear, the weapon that led the defense of the city. And the last, and one of the most intriguing exhibits, a miniature device for containing Stellaron. Soon we'll discuss the city's history in a bit more detail, find out what Stellaron is, and moreover, see this device in its actual size. But for now, let's leave the museum building and continue on. By the way, if you are into music, you can visit the Neverwinter workshop, whose owner has her own rock band featuring some local celebrities. For example, one of the Silvermane Guards officers plays the keyboards in the band. It will surely leave an impression on you. Thanks to the central heating in the houses of Belobog, it's always warm, but the air is very dry, so people here love ice treats like the Kvass iceberg, which is also served in the Goethe Hotel building. The Goethe Hotel was founded by Goethe, as you might have guessed. A highly respected person. The hotel is also famous for the dishes it serves, especially the local herbal tea. I recommend staying here for the night. You definitely should see the views of the administrative square from here. But when you live here, you shouldn't forget about the dangers of the outside world. Not far from the hotel, there is a closed alley that has recently started to undergo fragmentum corrosion, which is not only dangerous itself, but also capable of spawning terrible monsters. However, of course, we will take a walk there together. Actually, our walk along the front line has been personally coordinated with the captain of the Silvermane Guardians. Here he is, by the way. You can wave to him, but try not to distract him too much. His work is extremely important and intense. Meanwhile, we will continue our walk further into the Forbidden Zone, and along the way I will tell you about the history of the city's origins. Surrounding the city is the Eternal Freeze. It wasn't always like this. To be precise, it began about 700 years ago. Before that, the planet had several different regions. However, the story began a little earlier, when a mysterious object, known as a Stellaron, fell into the planet. Among civilizations, theories about doomsday spread, in which Stellaron was considered a symbol of disaster, and many people left the planet in fear. Looking back, it seems that their action was generally right. Under the leadership of the remarkable architect Alice Rand, other architects began to build shelters. The shelters built by Alice herself was named Belobog. About 10 years later, the Antimatter Legion invaded the planet. and the shelters began to fall one by one. The front line reached the unfinished Belobog, and the city entered a 30 years war. After the city was built, a blizzard began, which continues to this day and is known as the Eternal Freeze. No one knows for sure why it started, but most sources connect its appearance with Stellaron or Elisrand herself. As for the Legion, you might ask, they had to almost completely halt their attacks on the city because the weather conditions no longer suited them. Right here, 700 years ago, stood the northern border of Belobog, and then an ancient battle took place. It was here that Elisrand led the first detachment of the Silvermane Guardians in resistance against the Antimatter Legion. In present days, the memory of those events has not faded, and manifestations of respect can be seen everywhere, as, for example, the Elis Avenue recently walked along, named in honor of Elisrand. So, this is the pedestal which we have seen in the museum and where Stellaron once stood, which, according to rumors, was the source of Fragmentum. It couldn't be destroyed for a long time until many tried. But after the recent events, when the previous Supreme Guardian Kakolia helped to seal Stellaron at the cost of her own life, hope has emerged in this world. Let's enjoy the Northern Lights and conclude today's tour on that note. I hope you found it interesting and I didn't overwhelm you with too much history. After returning from our walk from the surroundings, I suggest to have a snack at the Grand Hotel Goethe and embark on a journey to the underworld, which has been closed for over 10 years. We'll get there on a cable car. The first thing we see is the center of the city Boulder town. The underworld used to flourish and local businessmen prospered. Now the place looks quite worn out due to the attacks of Fragmentum monsters. However, since the recent reopening of the underworld, things have slowly started to improve. The responsibility for ensuring the safety of the underworld was taken up by the volunteer organization Wildfire. By the way, they are still recruiting volunteers, despite the return of the silver-named guardians to their posts. Before we move on to the next stop, let's take a look at the forge core at the column connecting an underworld and overworld. It's quite a magnificent sight. As you can easily guess, the most popular professions here are miners and relic seekers. According to the Belobog Preservation Agreement, any antique items found must be handed over to the architects. So, as you can understand, life here is not easy. Have you ever wondered what they extract in the local mines? Well, before you use a cart with Geomero, an exometric ore which is necessary for survival. Actually, we have already seen an example of this ore in the Overworlds Museum. The burning of Geomero provides warmth in the city, and meanwhile we have reached the mine. Let's take a quick look inside. Geomero itself is quite dangerous. One of the most common ailments among miners is respiratory problems caused by inhaling Geomero. Moreover, with the increasing activity of Fragmentum, monsters suddenly appeared in many mines. Gradually, exploring the mines became quite dangerous. But just look at these massive deposits. It's the largest discovery in the past 30 years. Let's descend and take a closer look. It's not something you can see every day. People say these deposits are enough to provide Belobog with energy for about 230 days. And now, let's head back to the city. It's dangerous to stay here for too long. We've returned to the city, and here we approach a quite popular place here. Dr. Natasha's clinic, where she constantly works to keep the health of the residents at an acceptable level. She is truly a heroic woman. Anyway, let's not distract the doctor from her important business. By the way, there is some leisure here as well. For example, this unassuming looking place is the Fight Club, where you can both place bets on your favorite fighters and step into the ring yourself. There is a constant recruitment of new fighters here, and if you have the desire to join, you can contact the establishment's owner. But please, let's do it after the tour. I am still somewhat responsible for you. There are rumors that you can obtain invitations to special fights, much more sophisticated than those seen by ordinary visitors. However, I have never had the opportunity to witness them. Also, for those who want to stay in the underworld, there is a branch of the Grand Hotel Goethe, so you'll find a place to spend the night or pass a couple of evenings. Our final stop is the abandoned city, Rivet Town, where you can see how dangerous the authorities' decision to close the underworld and bring all the guards to the surface was. Before you is a once thriving city, now abandoned and left behind. Several years have passed since the Silverman Guardians left Rivet Town and went to the front lines. The city was evacuated due to the monster invasion. During the evacuation, some people went missing and are still sought after by their loved ones. And now, let's take a walk through the city and try to imagine what it was like when people lived here. Here, for example, used to be the most beautiful restaurant in town. One of the famous dishes of the restaurant was spicy fluffy mushrooms. It's not surprising, as a large part of the vegetation in the underworld consists of various types of mushrooms, and a significant part of the fauna is either inedible or difficult to obtain. Children from the orphanage used to be taken here for lunch, and that's where we're heading next. The abandoned orphanage is one of the most well-known and eerie places in the city. The orphanage ceased its operations shortly after the monster invasion and was relocated to the Boulder town. Let's continue our tour along the trade street to bypass the closed market. Market Square used to be crowded with people who enjoyed themselves and made purchases, but none of them remain, and the city has turned into ruins. However, there might still be hope for this place. If the attacks of the Fragmentum monsters ever cease and people wish to revive this place from the ashes, there is a chance. Even now, you can see traces of sudden human activity here. Take a look at this spot. It seems that someone was here recently. Otherwise, why would all this equipment be here? It's looking operational. And did you mention that the city lanterns are still working? A bit strange for an abandoned city, don't you think? I believe this place is the best one to conclude our tour. I hope you like the places we visit. Now you can leave your feedback about the work of our company and your guide. Until we meet again.